This podcast is brought to you by the Albany Public Library main branch and the generosity of listeners like you. What is a podcast? God, Daddy, these people talk as much as you do. Razib Khan's Unsupervised Learning.
Thanks for listening to the ungated version of the Unsupervised Learning podcast. If you want to read some essays on some of these topics, please check out razib.substack.com. Again, that's razib.substack.com. Thank you.
Hey everybody, it's Razib with the Unsupervised Learning podcast, and today I have the editors of Aporia on, Noah, Carl, and Bo Winegard. I think most of you know Noah and Bo probably in some level or capacity, but I'm going to let them introduce themselves right now. Noah and Bo, just talk about your education and why, how you got here.
I'll go first. I got a few degrees from Oxford in social science. I was involved in an academic controversy in 2018 to 2019. Since then, I've basically been an independent writer and researcher, most recently as one of the editors of Aporia. So not completely independent, but independent of the mainstream, I guess.
I am Bo Winegard. I made the mistake of getting a Ph.D. in social psychology because I was told that would be a wise path to take. And I was dissuaded from going into evolutionary psychology, which at the time was deemed too controversial. And in 2020, I was involved in, I guess, an academic quote unquote scandal, which we can talk about, briefly if anybody finds it of interest. And then since then, I have also been a writer, and I've worked for Aporia for, I guess, 2 years now.
Yeah. You were at Quillette for a little while, and then, yeah. So, I do have to say, Bo, you're very bad at timing. You got into social psychology maybe at a time when it wasn't optimal to get into social psychology.
Yes.
And you were an academic, a right-wing, maybe more than an edgelord academic. Well, I don't know if you're right. Okay, we don't need to get into your political evolution. Not super interesting, really, right. That happens. But, I'm not sure how right-wing you were then. I mean, you're definitely more conservative over the years. But 2020, worst time to be who you were in academia in the history of the world. Yes. And that's when you were in academia. So, I don't believe in fate, but you're definitely a negative indicator. Maybe just, what you're doing, what I'm saying? I mean, keeping it real here, because you might not have been canceled if your career was in the same place as it, was then now. You might not have.
Yes.
I mean, you'd be a little controversial, but at the end of the day, do people really want to do this right now? Probably not.
While the wider culture seems to have been getting less woke, at least since Trump took office and probably from slightly before that, academia isn't necessarily following the same trend.
Yeah, that's true.
In other words, academia still seems to be very woke, although right now seems to be more concerned with issues like Israel-Palestine than with race and evolution. Although that's always a perennial issue.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, there's always been things people cancel about, but I do think just logistically, in terms of execution of this sort of, for example, part of it is academics and activists that were continuously organizing on Twitter and X. They can't do that now. I mean, they don't do that. They're on Blue Sky, and the impact of that is lower. I think there's a lot of elements of what happened to you that just would be more difficult today. Yes. The will would be there, but executing it would be more difficult. And so, you guys got involved in Aporia. It had another name for a while. I forget what that name was now, but do you guys remember?
Yes, it was
Ideas
Sleep Furiously, taken from the Chomsky quote.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I mean, you guys didn't start it. I've been on the podcast. I think was it Jonathan Anomaly who interviewed me. I don't know. I've been on the Aporia podcast. I've written for you guys a little bit, mostly just rebuttals, whatever. Yep. I enjoy your website. I mean, that's why I have you on. I mean, whatever. So although I guess I can have like a hate guest, that would be fun. But you guys give a little bit of controversy. Do you guys want to talk about the hit piece? I think the hit piece was mostly on Aporia and Aporia adjacent stuff. There was an attack on your website that caused issues with funding and public flack and blowback and all this usual stuff. Can you give a quick pressy about what happened about that? Yeah, just tell the listeners so they know.
So this undercover.
Wait, and just to be clear, a lot of it had to do with stuff that I think some of it happened before one or the other of you were there with other people associated with Aporia. It's just kind of like a sprawling thing where it wasn't like Noah Carl did this and blah blah blah. It was like this guy who used to be editor before Noah and Bo, and there's another foundation associate. Honestly, it was a little confusing.
It's a bit confusing and complicated. There's a guy called Matt who used to work for Aporia. He kind of founded Ideas Sleep Furiously, which became Aporia. And a while ago, I can't remember the exact timeline, he was approached at a right-wing conference somewhere in Europe. And the person who approached him was a undercover journalist posing as an investor. And this guy led Matt to believe that he was interested in investing in a project Matt was then engaged in, which was unrelated to Aporia. But I think he also expressed an interest in investing in Human Diversity Foundation, which is an organization that technically owns Aporia, an organization founded by Emil Kierkegaard. And anyway, this undercover journalist managed to deceive Matt and other people in totally different areas for some months. And he filmed him undercover and sort of goaded him into saying various provocative things, some of which reflected his beliefs, some of which probably didn't. And then he managed to get Matt to reveal the name of a gentleman who'd given quite a lot of money to the Human Diversity Foundation. Then, sometime later, The Guardian, who were in cahoots with this undercover journalist, exposed the Human Diversity Foundation and various other groups that they disapproved of. And at the same time, there was a documentary on British television exposing these nefarious groups. And one of the results was that our funding got cut off. And so we're now relying to a large extent on subscriptions. Do you want to add anything, Bo?
I would only note that in the article they wrote about us, the only thing they really said about me, other than forwarding a couple of my articles for derision, was either a misunderstanding or mendacious. That was, it said I was an avid promoter of Donald Trump. And I think what they had done is I wrote a dialogue, should we vote for Trump, in which I had somebody advocate for him, but also somebody advocate against him. And I think they took the for him side as my view or something, because in fact I did not vote for Trump. So,
and now you would take great offense to being accused of supporting Donald Trump.
I take great umbrage at that. But it was from my perspective, it was. I mean, not only was it utterly immoral, of course, to deceive somebody and provoke the person into saying provocative things only to divulge that. But also, it was utterly uninformative. I mean, our articles are online. I would be happy to send them to anybody who requests them in an email, and I would be happy to converse with that person about them. So,
yeah, the old Steve Saylor point and sputter tactic was used a lot. They would just kind of quote things that had been said in Aporia articles and expect their readers to be outraged, without really, attempting to grapple with them at all.
Yeah. When did this hit take? What was the timing? When did this hit take place?
It was in the documentary and the article in The Guardian came out in October or November.
Yeah, that's right. But it was sort of a protracted affair because this person had developed a relationship with Matt over a period of time. And in fact, he was in he was in one of our meetings that I was in. I vaguely recall him. So timeline's a little hard.
And we should also say that Matt left Aporia for reasons unrelated to this controversy.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
We didn't kick him out or anything.
Yeah. All right. Okay. So that happened. You guys are looking for subscriptions, and you have this website. So it's. I'm just looking at what your articles right now. I think I'm on your list, but got a lot of emails in this newsletter era. So it's a little hard. I'm sure you guys know how that feels.
Yes, absolutely.
I do have to say, like, running a newsletter, like running a Substack, running a website, it's, feel like I should subscribe to other newsletters to see what's going on. But then that results in inability to follow other newsletters. There's like a perfect balance, and it's hard to maintain. But
an unfortunate effect of Substack is the deconsolidation of writing. Rather than most writing being found in a relatively small number of outlets, it's now diversified across dozens or hundreds of outlets. And as you say, there's this problem of how many newsletters to subscribe to.
Mm-hmm. Well, okay, so let me just I'm gonna right now. I think this is representative. So okay. I will I'll just name off the articles you got on the front page.
Yep.
Immigration does not solve population decline. Reparations won't work. Autism is bad. What is clinical depression? Do most people want 2 children? Second American baby boom. God that failed. A review of Ross Douthat's Believe. Vertical density of urban apartments is catastrophic for fertility. So, I guess what I'm saying is you're not American Renaissance or Mankind Quarterly. You guys have gotten, the third rail that you guys get hit for is the race stuff.
Yeah.
And, that's there, but I wouldn't say it's over 50% of the content or anything. There's stuff about sex, gender here, politics, immigration, the natalism, fertility, crisis, which is happening right now, and that's a big deal. There's some evolutionary psychology stuff, like standard sex and gender stuff too.
We've also recently begun a crusade against AI,
bringing back the Luddites.
Okay, but you use AI for your visualizations, right?
We do use AI for those. Yeah.
We're hypocrites.
Okay. All right. So some of this stuff gets you in trouble to various degrees. I guess the question I have, and you guys, just for the listener, I think I don't know. I've met Bo. We're not I wouldn't say we're close friends, but we're friendly. We've known each other for a while. Noah, we have a lot of mutuals.
Yep.
We've been in the same group chats, I think. I don't know you I don't know you as well. I know Bo, but whatever. There's a certain interaction that people have. So I know you guys. It's not and my Uber. I do have to say, Bo and I go way back, and I told Bo much of what was going to happen to him. I tell Colin Wright this too. I know exactly what was going to happen to Colin. I knew exactly what was going to happen to Bo. And initially, you were just like, Razib, I think if you're reasonable. No, not if you're reasonable. That's just not going to happen.
No, I do. You did presage it, and I do remember this. I was like, no, I'm going to do this judiciously, and I'm going to be so reasonable it won't happen to me.
Well, I do have to say different. Yeah.
Was the advice that you offered to Bo given before or after your own episode at the New York Times?
I think it was a little after, but I knew. You can see what was happening. Colin Wright will tell you the story. I'm the first person that ever DM'd him because he got a Twitter account right before he wrote for Quillette. He had a couple of hundred followers, and I dropped into his DMs because I noticed he was a postdoc. I'm like, your academic career is over. And he's like, what are you talking about? I'm like, it's over. And he's like, well, I just wrote a simple, no, you didn't write a simple article. You just destroyed your academic career here. So it took him 2 years to realize he couldn't get a job.
So Razib,
and the reason was,
funny about that is now I think this is correct. I didn't know Colin. He sent me an email, and I think he was debating publishing that article in Quillette or sending it to Quillette. And I was like, yeah, be prepared for some pushback, but you should probably do it. What are we doing if we're not telling the truth?
Which article was this, out of interest?
It was his original sex and gender article.
Yeah.
It was it's not a very exciting article, actually.
He was innocuous.
He was suggesting that there could only be 2 genders, possibly.
Yeah, something like that.
Sex is real and there are 2 sexes.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
It
yes,
wasn't a very exciting article. Oh no,
I
it's the New
admit-
Evolution Deniers. The New Evolution
yeah.
Deniers, November 3rd, 2018, actively banning users for stating true facts about basic human biology, et cetera, et cetera. It's a very, very milquetoast article. End of
Yeah. But
2019, and that was the beginning of the end.
You forewarned him that despite
Yes.
its milquetoast nature, he was likely to exit academia fairly soon.
Well, he didn't know what time it was. He was acting like it was 2010 or something. You know, like
That was
2018
my
was
confusion.
clearly on the. Yeah, 2018 was very, very much the exception. Yeah, I mean, I will tell you, just get the listener some context here. Is I'm not gonna say who it is, but I mean, there are like, well, actually, no, I mean, I'm not gonna say who they are, but these are things I would not say at the time, mostly because like I don't like to it's kind of like speak out of class and ooh, I knew you were reading me and now you're woke, But in like 2010, a lot of people that are very performatively woke or were performatively woke, I would read my blog, Gene Expression back then, and they would tell people, yeah, I read it, and like I don't agree with everything, or like it's my favorite blog, although there's some stuff I don't, you know what I'm saying? Like they would say things like that, or
Yeah,
yeah.
There was a huge amount of dishonesty and cowardliness during the Great Awakening, especially from academics who are by nature cowardly.
Yeah, so there's a lot of people that I know that they knew what time it is because they were creating the time, whereas some people for various reasons ideologically or a lack of social acumen, Bo and Colin, but they did not realize that the waters were receding and they were just standing there all alone on the beach. Hey, check out this shell. Look, it's so interesting. No. We don't look at the shells anymore.
That's a good message.
Not allowed. So, that was happening. You guys now are not in academia, and I do have to say, like, I don't know how many. I know you guys are going through some issues with, the funding and all that stuff, and that's a whole thing. Colin is probably arguably in a better place in terms of his influence, and obviously I don't like this is all on him, like his work, but I mean. I do have to say, it's like I do think that I talked about him like joining the Manhattan Institute well before it happened. Like I thought that was a good fit. I think it's a good fit. Like he's a fellow there right now. He's doing things. He's shaping policy, as you guys know. He's much more influence than he would have had as an academic. So the cancellation, the driving out of Colin Wright out of academia, really, really had a big impact in a way academics were not expecting. So it's not all for the bad, but what we're getting at in this part of the conversation is, there's been an arc in American culture and American society. Now, I just said, like, I don't think that we are where we were at 2020. We're not quite totally open about things, but some of the attempts to cancel do not work anymore, mostly because, one, there's like a lot more noise out there, and second, as you guys know, at the Cultural Revolution, at some point, it just stopped working. Like threats to send everybody to work camps stopped working because everyone couldn't be sent to work camps. I think there is a tendency right now, like a lot of people just not caring. Part of his Twitter has radically changed under Elon Musk. So the thumb was always on the scale a little bit for the progressives in the previous order, and now it's on the scale for the conservatives. And there's good things and there's bad things. Like I think like all three of us are irascible enough to admit that despite our ideological, not necessarily hostility to some of the changes, that the new Twitter is kind of retarded.
Yes, I fully endorse that statement. Yes.
I mean, it's kind of like, it's like sometimes you look at the timeline, you're just like, well, okay, I'll just come back tomorrow.
Enough internet for the day.
Yes.
Well, okay, so like let me just say, have you guys noticed the amount of just like the issue is like it's hard to engage with someone when they don't there's like no basic facts there. So I'm gonna give two examples, and I want to. This is not on the agenda, but I'm curious what you guys think because I know you're on social, and obviously like three of us, like if there's like one thing that unites us, is like we try not to lie. you know? Like if
Yeah.
we were political operatives, we would lie. That's honestly part
That's
of the job.
Yeah.
That's the job. So I don't like, you know, but we're not political operatives.
right.
We have political views, but we're not operatives. We just try to tell the
Right.
truth. I mean, so for example, like here's something like a basic lie where it's like some big magatard accounts like, well, you know, they're using the H-1Bs to staff hotels. Okay, do you really engage with this? Because it's just so stupid.
You don't engage.
But like you see, it's got like millions of you know what I'm trying to say. So that's happening, and then there's another like Twitter quote article because you know a links out are gone where it's just like a picture of a small town, and then it's like another picture of a small town with a woman, and then it's like, oh, this is why you should move to a small town because there's gonna be this woman in this like nice little small town.
You mean
And
like
you
a
should move to
woman
small town.
in a traditional garments,
Whatever,
in wheat fields or something?
Yeah, whatever.
Trap
It's just
headline.
like, but it's like very image oriented. It's like a picture and it elicits emotions. It's not really like analysis. It's like a semi-literate way of communicating. So, you
Yeah,
know,
the comments that I
yeah.
find most amusing and objectionable are the ones like they want us dead, or you know.
Well, because they're
Without
open ended, so
specifying
you're gonna
who
get
they are.
outraged no matter what. Yeah. You don't say who they or like you
Yeah.
tweet a picture. It's like I tweet a picture of like Bo Winegard and like this picture makes me think every day.
Yeah,
It gets a lot of engagement because everyone's like, "Wow, what does that mean? That's profound," you know. But it's just like it's just engagement. It's like basically there's like, you know, it's like a whole field of like marketing and psychology is being applied to like engage with people, and it's just like
well, I
pretty
think
annoying because
it's taken people a certain amount of time to realize, and maybe the algorithms have also changed to some extent as well, that the way to go viral and gain followers and therefore potentially not only influence but also money now is to post images more than comments, and obviously to post comments that attempt to lower the status of your political outgroup.
I think also people have recognized that utter shamelessness is actually an asset on social media, and then never apologizing, never saying, yeah, maybe there's nuance here. Oh, yeah, maybe I was wrong about X, Y, or Z. If you notice, Razib, I do not really participate on social media much anymore. I basically, I will send out our articles. Maybe I'll write a thread if I want people to read my article. And then I hit mute because the engagement is utterly unedifying. It's not something I want to participate anymore. And as Noah can tell you, or you can listen to our podcast, I launched into a diatribe against MAGA. So I think that it's becoming almost equally inane from the right now. Not conservatism, but the right, you know, what we could call the right. But we can get into that or we can't get into that, whatever you want.
Yeah, no, let's loop back. But I want to like talk about, you know, some of the race stuff, for example, which I think that gets you in the most trouble at this point. Although,
sure.
I mean, right now it's not like a big focus, although there's a little bit of race stuff. I mean, I guess the question that I would ask here is, you know, and like, look, I've done my own amount of that for longer than you guys, you know?
Yes.
So the issue that I always have with that, and this is not a judgment on being interested in it, but it's just like, how much can you say? Like, have you guys thought about like, okay, I think this is like, you know, I think like, you know, post number 23 on cold winters theory is, you know, okay, maybe that's about it. Does that make sense? Do you understand what I'm getting at?
No,
that gives me a great idea for a post on cold winters theory.
No, it actually absolutely makes sense. And I can tell you, I'm actually exhausted with the topic personally. I don't think I've written like specifically about race in quite a while. I think I wrote a review of Coleman Hughes's book on colorblindness, and I still was like, it's my favorite piece that I've written, but that was like basically the last piece on race I've written. I was like, okay, I've said all that I want to on this topic. I'm pretty bored with it. I have myriad interest. It was never like my chief interest. People might find that bizarre, or they might think I'm like prevaricating or something, but I'm not. The reason I did talk about it a lot is because I made the mistake of thinking that intellectuals were supposed to talk about reality, obviously with prudence and judiciousness, but honestly, and to grapple with undeniable facts, like differences in IQ. We're not even talking about causality here. And the fact that there were so many pervasive lies about this was so irritating to me that I wanted to write about it and challenge people to debates about it and just get those ideas out there. But yeah, I'm personally rather fatigued by it.
Yeah, the thing is, although the arguments have been out there for years or even decades, and they keep being remade, including by people such as ourselves, the part of the reason for that is obviously that they have not gained currency in academia outside of a few pockets, and there's still widespread disagreement with them. I'm trying to be objective, rather, so I didn't say denial.
Well, yeah, I think we can say, just to interject really quickly, I think we can say denial on group differences in IQ, since those are incontrovertible. I mean, those are in mainstream textbooks. When we get to the ideological analysis,
for example,
different.
in the very latest Guardian hit piece, which came out, I think, yesterday, which included a doxing of someone and criticized Aporia and criticized Diana Fleischman, who's done some work for us. I think the author disputed that there are differences in IQ between populations. An indisputable fact.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Well, I mean, with that, yeah. Although to be fair, I think that author and like that hit piece, this is again like not knowing what time it is in terms of it's just okay. Part of it was the hit piece, and we don't need to like refer to what it is specifically because I'm going to post this later.
Mm-hmm.
Is talking about how there's all these evil people in positions of power, and they're super powerful, and they're super influential, and they're in the Trump administration, and they're shaping policy, and I don't really understand how that's a hit piece. Like you're just telling everybody that these people are incredibly powerful. Like it's not going to have the impact because what it was like 5 years ago, a hit piece would come out. There are people in power who would act on it, like getting, we don't need to go into the details, but I'll just name check something specifically. The Brian Pesta affair with the data, which that was obviously a coordinated move to get rid of him for doing something which everyone does in terms of like the data sharing and stuff like that. Okay.
Right.
So those are the stories that it was like the media, activists, and people in institutions would act in a coordinated way in the wake of a hit piece. That doesn't happen anymore because they don't control all the institutions. And in fact, what the hit piece is saying is the institutions are probably controlled by the evil people that they're doing a hit piece on. So it doesn't land in the same way because it's like, okay, yeah, they're in power, so we're supposed to be against them. Like that's, you know what I'm saying?
It's a
little
right.
off like that.
I should mention that I'm not involved in the Trump administration. I'm not one of these powerful people.
I also am not.
Yeah. I mean, you're English, so hopefully, actually, there are English people involved, but like, not that many. So I mean, you're kind of like, I mean, you've gotten what you want out of that. I do think that in terms of like the distribution and IQs that you're talking about, which is like a classical chart that people post. I mean, that is an empirical reality. There was a phase, I would say, during the peak of the awakening where the idea was to say IQs don't matter or just put so much like smoke that people don't know that distribution exists.
Right.
I think that moment is over insofar as the origin of that distribution is still under debate.
Right.
But it's much less disputable. I mean, you can like bring it up in public, right?
Yeah, that might very well be true, and I should say another reason I'm not as interested in that topic is because progressives have ceased calling everything racist. I mean, one of the reasons I would write about that, and one of the arguments I consistently made was, if this group of people is going to claim that the United States is relentlessly racist, and you want to rebut that argument, one way of rebutting it is to point to differences in IQ, which obviously has relevance for differences in outcome. But if people aren't obsessed with that and they're not obsessed with racial disparities, then I don't think it's as interesting to talk about that publicly. Now, it might be interesting for evolutionary analysis or for academic analysis, psychometrics, but it's not as important to get it into the public.
They might still be talking about it, but many of them have left Twitter, X. Maybe they're now talking about it in different platforms.
Right.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, also another thing is, this is partly, all of us have kind of like complained about the new Twitter, but because maybe I'm blocking too many people, but I don't just block offensive accounts. I actually block engagement whoring accounts as well, because if you don't block them, they just start saturating to the point where they become your whole For You feed. So,
Right.
I proactively do block them, and there's new ones that come up. But in any case, it does seem like the race discourse on Twitter has evolved. So there's a whole like anti-Indian race discourse that's in my feed. Bigger than the anti-Indian and anti-Jew discourses are bigger than the anti-Black discourse, right? And so now there's like a whole different like layer of argumentation, and it's not 2020 anymore. In 2020 there was a weird thing where it's like everything had to be like kind of like Black American derived or something. Like sea shanties were Black American derived. There were all sorts of weird things that were going on.
Black women invented the telescope.
Yeah, you might disagree, but like, do you want to risk your job over it?
That's right.
So it's not like that anymore. Like everything is transformed, and so now you obviously, Bo, the disagreeable person you are, you've now turned on MAGA, and we can talk a little bit about that later. But
I did just want to add one more reason why I'm still talking about topics like race and IQ. There's recently been an effort on the part of some academics and activists to have much or all of Richard Lynn's body of work, particularly on national IQs, reviewed and potentially retracted. And so I wrote an article which was a kind of qualified defense of Richard Lynn's national IQ estimates, and a few others have written similar articles in recent months, including Cremieux.
Yeah, I do have to say, let me just talk about because I've known of these people, obviously, like people who followed me, and there are some listeners. I met a listener in New York. Was it last spring, a year ago? And he had been reading me since 2002 when he had just graduated college. Yeah, he was married with kids. It was really strange. But anyway, my point is, I know there are some people who have followed me on the internet for that long. Actually, some people have followed me from Usenet from the 1990s. That's really weird. Yeah, there was someone on Twitter who was like, "Can you unblock me? I've been following you since you were posting on Social History What If in 1997." I was like,
how tragic it must have been for that person that you blocked them.
I get annoyed, and so I blocked them. So they emailed me, and I was like, okay, like, you actually know that I was posting on that Usenet forum in 97. I will unblock you for this special occasion because that's weird.
Yeah.
Kind of creepy, actually. But in any case, I would say, like, in terms of these people who are hereditarians and have brought up race and IQ, and some of them brought up sex and IQ, certain type of personality. Let me just say that just observing it, and I'm not saying anything about you guys. Obviously, you're all like fine and above the board, but there's a range of types of people where some of them you can see that they are actually motivated by ideological, axes to grind, and then others, for example, like Arthur Jensen, sometimes. He's kind of like, I think he had vague, by the end of his life, he was pretty much a libertarian, I think he was a conventional liberal in the 1960s, but, his politics were not very salient. It didn't seem like it really impacted his science. He's very highly cited. That would be the kind of like not optimal, but that would be
platonic ideal of a scholar.
Yeah, and also, there are mutual friends of ours who've told me who met Arthur Jensen, who said, he was clearly, like, we would say he was on the spectrum, and it was almost like he was a robot when it came to the science. Like, he just like was not very emotional at all.
Right.
He wasn't impacted by the attacks. He would just go where the data went. Like, okay, that's like one ideal. Then there's other people that are just like very, very, like they came into it for ideological reasons, and then they found the science. And I'm not a big fan of like, you have to like, punch people on the right. Like my tendency is just to ignore people if they annoy me. on the right, because it's just like then you get into the whole morass of where you draw the line. But I mean, there is that problem, right? Where what they do, was done to Aporia to some extent, is where you do like a little daisy chain or network tree, and you're like, this person talked to this person who talked to this person who talked to this person who's a Nazi, you know?
Yeah.
And that's kind of ridiculous. On the other hand, it is something you always have to kind of monitor because you never know.
Yeah, do you remember, was it Pinkerton who had that elaborate, looked like a Jackson Pollock painting with all of these things going to everywhere?
It's Pinkerite.
Pinkerton.
Yeah.
Pinkerite. Yeah, so you do, and I would say, I mean, I think anything that is attractive to people who are disagreeable, and I would have, I'm disagreeable in a certain way, but I would say not in a particularly rambunctious way. But you may disagree with that. We can discuss that. But yeah, any kind of forbidden topic that requires a sort of steel and a sort of callousness to public opinion is going to attract some people who are unsavory, right? That's just inevitable. And it's certainly the case that anytime I receive an email where it'd be like, hey, what do you think about this race difference or that race difference? I'd be like, okay, like, who is this person? Where are they coming from? Do they belong to a nefarious group? So I do think you have to be careful about that, and it's certainly worth worrying about. I agree with you, however, that what I really dislike is when somebody will confront me, and I'm sure no one dislikes this, although I won't speak for them, but will say, do you denounce so-and-so? And I'm like, I don't even know so-and-so. Like, I have nothing to do with that person's opinions. If we happen to share the same opinion, that's unfortunate, or maybe fortunate because it's true, but you can talk to that person about how he or she arrived at the opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I would reiterate that in an environment where anyone who speaks honestly about a topic is accused of being racist, it is likely that a large proportion of the people who are willing to speak honestly about the topic are going to not find being accused of racism to be particularly objectionable, and that may include some genuine racists.
Yeah, I mean, let's use let's go back a little bit. Like, I'm going to use an analogy to the right in America, which 40% of my listeners are not Americans, so whatever. But like, we are the capital of the world. You guys know exactly what's going on. Basically, our politics are more important to you than your politics, right, Noah? So, you should kind of know. So, with the MAGA movement, or the right, before it was, if you read James Pogue's New York Times article about Bannon versus Elon, like I have a quote in there, and I talked to James for a while. I know James. It was obvious to me that, let's say like Bannon is like the intelligentsia representative of this kind of like reactionary, I want to be in the 1950s America, versus Elon's faction and David Sachs and the tech people, who, they have a somewhat different view, obviously. It was obvious to me that those two factions would clash over things like H-1B, and also a lot of it is just like social like it's like what social scene you're in and what social scene you want to be in and who is you're surrounded by. And yeah, from the left they're all just like one big red blob, but they're not a blob. There's a lot of internal structure.
Yeah.
And so within any movement there's conflicts and there's debates, and you have to choose when you're going to bring up these conflicts. Like, are they deal breakers, et cetera, et cetera? Do people just like fight it out in terms of arguing and whatnot? And this is true in intellectual movements. There was the editor of Jacobin who said that he wasn't going to do it, this wasn't the time and place, but he could make a defense of the execution of the Romanov children. He was on center left podcasts. Like, the left, the center left engages with Jacobin, who are democratic socialists. They're right. Socialists, but that's just the choice that they make. And I guess that's cool, even though, they're a little softer. I mean, like Jacobin has had cartoons about like Vladimir Lenin and stuff like that, like, Papa Lenin. And it's just like, okay, for me, that's in bad taste because like communism is bad. I don't know. But, I don't know. the lines get drawn in different ways, and it's always kind of you always have to update, you always have to think about it, right? And just like figure it out. But what I was just bringing up is when you talk about these taboo topics, there's all these people that are involved or have been involved. You don't know these people. You came to like these positions and these ideas
That's right.
Through your own kind of mental faculties. Then you're exposed to it, and then you interact with some of these people, and then it's all of a sudden like I demand you denounce thee. And I'm just like, well, right. I just met thee, or like like a couple of years ago, the funniest thing was it wasn't funny, but it was sad. But wait, one of my academic denunciations was I'll name it because like some of the listeners are scientists, but so this guy Dan Balnick, who's a professor at UConn now, but he was a professor at UT. I've met him once at a conference where we talked in front of a poster board for 5 minutes. And Dan referred to this meeting once, and people in ecology tried to cancel him because I had beers with him. That was how they represented it. I felt bad for the bro because it's like literally it was a 5-minute conversation,
right?
Not about anything like super interesting. And they tried to, and so it's just like, look.
In regard to your anecdote, 5 minutes discussion is more than enough time for the evil to transfer.
That's true.
Between people.
It doesn't take long for the contagion.
Well, okay.
Razib, I'll tell you, I honestly, maybe not so much anymore, but, even in 2023, when this madness was still regnant, I would say, I would actually feel bad about asking people onto my podcast, or if I was the host, because I was like, you want to make sure you don't get contaminated with me. Like, I don't want people to castigate you because you had a conversation with me. That's how bad it was. I don't feel that way anymore. Things are a little bit better, but yeah, that was a huge risk, and people would do that. And that was incredibly unfortunate because, as you say, I can't speak for Noah, but I was a person of the left when I arrived at hereditarianism. So I was a leftist hereditarian for quite a long time. So it's not as if like I got into right-wing movements and then was like, I need to find the evidence to support my views on immigration.
You mean you were the leftist hereditarian?
Yeah, I was the only.
Well, I know, I know some
there are some.
Yeah, no, I'm exaggerating.
Yeah.
I would say, so my readership, I would say, has always been like about like kind of be like 30 to 40% libertarian, 30 to 40% right, and then like the residual was there on the left, so like 20%.
I would
like
imagine our readership is quite similar to that.
Yeah.
Maybe with slightly more people on the far right.
Yeah. Yeah, that's probably what it is. But and I've been like monitoring. I take polls like for 20 years. It's always the same. It's always 90% male. That distribution, about half PhDs. That's kind of how it runs. So like we've been talking kind of about the social stuff and stuff. We've gone like 40 minutes. So I want to hit like some of the other things. Like, what do you guys think about like cold winter's theory? Like that sort of stuff. Because like I want to like let's see if like we can get some beef here. Let's get a little yeah. So. Are you guys still down with that? Like, what's going on with that?
Noah, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I don't consider myself an expert on this particular theory.
Okay.
But the one of the key counterexamples to the theory is, of course, the Eskimos, the Inuits, the people that live in very cold climate.
Well, actually, we should articulate what the theory is. I think like Bo's written more about it, so maybe like Bo, you articulate what it is. Actually,
okay. So I haven't thought about it in a little bit, to be clear, and I never wrote like a full paper on it. I forwarded it as a plausible mechanism. I thought it was a reasonable suggestion or hypothesis. The basic idea is that the challenges of cold winters, but really the important thing is the environmental fluctuation is cognitively challenging in certain ways, in that it requires foresight and perhaps more cultural innovation. I think the evidence for the cultural innovation as you move north from the equator is reasonably strong. Again, I haven't read that literature in a little bit, but I think there's pretty strong evidence for that. So that's the basic argument, is that the the exigencies of survival as you move north were such that it selected for slightly higher cognitive ability. I always argued that that was like a plausible hypothesis, but then you needed more. So probably agriculture was important. Probably some kind of cultural selection was important. And my view is it's reasonable and scholars should debate it and argue about it. And if you look at the animal literature, for example, if you look at birds, scholars debate the topic of brain size and how that relates to environmental fluctuation. It's treated as a perfectly reasonable hypothesis. But for some reason, in the human evolutionary literature, it's treated as though it's like a fatuous proposal. It's like mocked as if it's ridiculous. And I've really never understood that. And I haven't encountered, I would say, I mean, it might be out there if you know it, Razib. I'm happy to read it, but I've never encountered like a definitive rejection of the hypothesis or falsification of it. I've encountered people who have mocked it and said it's kind of silly, but it seems to me still plausible, at least last I looked at it and thought about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, so I think like, as a model, it's model's a model. Like you can't denounce a model. Actually, you can, but I think that's what you're getting at. What you're getting at. A model should stand on its own legs instead of like the emotional reaction, the personalization.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think for maybe I should write a post about this. So Aporia et al., just like David Reich's lab, Ali Akbari came out of like a new like natural selection paper. And then there's another one that came out recently about East Asia. I actually haven't like looked at it, but there's been like preliminary evidence. I guess like the biggest well, I'm gonna say it. It's like, look, sometimes you can make and Cold Winter theory is not a very complicated theory, so it's not. But sometimes you can make a complicated theory, and so like. Well, I mean, I don't know how to say this without being like, kind of, because I know there's a little bit of beef, but like Peter Frost, like I've known Peter for a while. I read his book. He had a theory about like Ice Age and like sexual selection and pigmentation.
Yeah,
that's all been falsified by genomics, like ancient DNA. So like Peter needs to like update his views, So we now know what polygenic scores for educational attainment are. And we can actually look at ancient genomes, and it looks like the largest proportion of selection for educational attainment in Europeans, it happened during the Neolithic. And that the Yamnaya actually dropped down, and then there was selection again after the arrival of the Yamnaya. So I think the projected IQ of Western hunter-gatherers is like in the low 180s. Or the low 80s.
I was going to say 180.
Yeah, no.
John von Neumann's.
Yeah, in favor of cold winter. No, but it's like the low 80s. And so the evidence here is like it's not the cold winter themselves, because obviously the winters in the beginning of the Holocene were quite cold.
Right.
Yeah.
It was the arrival of the Neolithic farmers from the Middle East, from Anatolia, that increased the educational attainment. And the educational attainment dropped with the arrival of the Yamnaya from the colder Eastern Europe. And then it went back up again after their admixture. So to me, like I think, and in East Asia, it seems like the educational attainment has also been increasing during the Holocene. Obviously, winters did not get magically colder during the Holocene. In fact, they got warmer. And so, I think the point that I would make here is like there might be something in the temperate zone, but it's definitely an interaction effect with a particular lifestyle associated with agriculture and high density living.
Yeah.
Right?
Agreed.
Yeah.
I mean, I would also add that the estimates in the Akbari paper and some other similar papers are subject to a certain amount of error. So could be that the hunter-gatherer IQs were slightly higher than their estimates imply.
Yeah,
But I agree with what you said, Razib.
Yeah, to your point, Razib, I completely agree with that. And I think like it's possible that I embraced a more simplistic cold winters theory at one time in, 2016 or something. But I think what you just articulated is probably what I've thought since 2018 or so. Now, again, I think it's really hard to analyze these things. I mean, obviously we have better data than we used to, but when I was first interested in the topic, we didn't really have the data to answer these questions, or we had, we were looking at like skull size, for example. So I always just thought, look, let's treat this as we would any normal theoretical hypothesis and, have at it, have the debate.
Yeah.
I mean, another interesting counterexample to the theory, aside from the Eskimos and Inuits having somewhat lower IQs than, for example, North Eurasians, is that the chimpanzees and our common ancestor with chimpanzees, evolved in Africa. So the smartest species that has ever existed evolved in Africa.
Mm-hmm.
In a
Well, I think in terms of the intellectual history of this, I will go back and name check Rushton, who
Mm-hmm.
he was highly cited. He got a Guggenheim. He wasn't an unserious person like people say.
Right.
He was a serious academic, but Ed Dutton has written about this, and I'll trust Ed. Like, he seems like he was a bit sociopathic. My personal interactions with him before he died was on like an e-list we were on, and candidly, I found him to be a liar. He would lie, and so I was like pretty shocked by that. In terms of like, I privately corrected him on some genetic things,
Mm-hmm.
and he did it again, and I said, "Why are you doing that again?" He's like, "I don't know what you're talking about." I'm like I have the emails. It's like it's called email. Like, we have like copies of it. Philippe. Like, I don't really, you don't have to, it was like the Shaggy defense. Like, it wasn't me. I'm like, what's going on?
Ed Dutton came to very similar conclusions in his biography of Rushton, which I haven't read, but I understand that he concluded that he had sort of quite severe flaws of personality.
Yeah, so but it was hard because in terms of, I don't really want to like call someone out like that. Like, look, this person is probably a liar, but like that is actually, and so when you're talking about cold winters theory, Rushton had an idea about like R and K selection, but also it was like based on a very coarse model of out of Africa, and it was this idea that like Asians and Europeans and Africans in a rank order of like characteristics, and it was due to this like three-way phylogenetic tree and the out of Africa migration.
Yeah.
That was like kind of viable in the 1990s when we didn't know much. Now we know a lot, right? And now we know natural selection continues, and and there's a lot of admixture and all this stuff.
It also always left out, for example, Native Americans. It never grappled with Native Americans, and in fact, they don't really fit into his schema well because they actually have longer life expectancy. So it's like they don't. He had like a very simplistic model, undoubtedly. I will say I read Race, Evolution, and Behavior. It was one of the early books I read on race differences. And I found it quite interesting, even while thinking, okay, this is clearly a bit simplistic here. But Jensen forwarded, or Jensen found the cold winters theory, perhaps a more simplistic version of it. I doubt he would accept it today if he had access to all of the data we have. But, he, in the G Factor, he thought that it was plausible. So it's not just like, Rushton's intellect. Yeah.
But I think, he was definitely like,
Schopenhauer had an idea, a cold winters idea, the German philosopher, not that.
Well, the idea that weather affects temperament in your body,
yes,
whether you're hereditary, goes back to the Greeks.
Yeah, absolutely.
Where it's like they thought, they were obviously at the perfect climate for
of course,
civilization.
To be robust.
It was too cold. It was too cold in the north and too hot in the south. So they were just at the perfect climate.
Yeah.
So I guess the point that I'm getting at here is, we're juggling multiple balls, and it depends on where you start out from. So a lot of the psychometrics people, for example, they see the distributions, and like within the discussion portion of a paper, you have to put like kind of speculative things, and that's where that goes in. Whereas like, let's say like I think about more from like a population genetic perspective first, and then I see like the psychometric stuff as kind of secondary. And so it's a little, you're coming at it from two directions, and that's where like some of the disagreements can emerge. Ideally, the disagreements like synthesize into something that's better. So I think like right now, like what can we say? Like we can say that these group differences are robust. Maybe they'll change. Maybe they won't. Like you're going to have different priors. Some of the listeners are going to have different priors. Yeah. But my point is that we don't actually know the origins of them yet, and we're actually elucidating at least the genetic basis of some of these origins as we speak right now. Obviously, we shouldn't like not have opinions until we have all the data in, because science is a progressive process and all the data will never be in, you know?
Right.
But the point is, we are like updating and iterating all of these things.
Yeah.
It's a fascinating time actually to be interested in human genetic variation, which is just, human population genetics is what it is. I mean,
Yeah.
you can use the term race science, like I use it as a joke, but like really,
I would personally say that it's extremely unlikely, and any honest assessment of the evidence suggests it's extremely unlikely that genes play no role in, for example, a black-white IQ gap. Whether it's 20%, 50%, 80% is more debatable.
Yeah.
Go on, Bo.
Oh, well, I would just say I second that, and I think that's important. And also to your point, Razib, which I think is an excellent point, I completely agree with you. Like, people come at this problem from different perspectives, and then they disagree about different things, or they want more rigor from different things. I think that's actually great because it makes the science better at the end of the day, right? I want more disagreement about this. I want people to fustigate various things I've put out. That's good. What I don't want is people to attack me instead of the idea that I forwarded, right? Like if you shred up an idea I forwarded and said, this doesn't hold up, great. I will look into the evidence you give me and I will update. But we can't do that when we have these taboos and personal insults. That's been the problem, of course.
Yeah. No. So I think that's training. I mean, I'm not like entirely. I don't have like a strong opinion. Like, say, I don't want to get too inside baseball. Like Nathan Kofnes has this idea that, you need to talk about the hereditarian hypothesis,
right,
to rebut wokeness and all this stuff. I'm not sure. Again, like, the data is not in for me, which
right.
Easy to say, but I'm not sure if Nathan is right or not.
Well, may I say, Razib, I once had that view and made that argument like many times that you had to win the hereditarian debate. I've updated my views since it seems as though wokeism is at least waning. And it doesn't, I don't think we've had a hereditarian revolution, at least not to Kofnes's standards. So, so maybe it's true that we actually can, if not kill it, at least suppress it without hereditarianism.
Okay, so I'm gonna say something here. I mean, I know eventually this is gonna be ungated. Eventually, in the beginning, this will be beyond the paywall. But I'm just like inside baseball. There are a lot of people. Candidly, in the Trump administration. I mean, look, this is not like a big secret. Who accept like a hereditarian hypothesis.
Sure.
Like a lot of younger who've been like reading people online. Right. I won't say who they are. Like maybe they're here, but who like have been reading right. information online and have been convinced. Okay, so that's one thing. Mm-hmm. But I have journalist friends, believe it or not, and one of my journalist friends said candidly that even like more liberal centrist people in tech and other places have privately just been bringing up the hereditarian model in terms of group differences. Like, look, this is not going to be soluble. We can't just hire people willy-nilly based on like quotas. Right. I mean, basically that's what they're saying. Ultimately, I think part of what you're alluding to here is whatever the origin of problems when you try to socially engineer, if the car if the car is not moving, if the car is broken, people are going to stop building the car. It doesn't really matter like why it's broken.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's what I'm trying to say. I think the reason that the wokeness like hit the high tide and regressed. So here's a simple thing that has nothing to do with like the hereditarian hypothesis per se. In about 2020, there were many black women that were hired by the major publishers. They were very woke, very at least performatively in public, to I guess sell more black books, like get more black authors in, use their contacts. Women came from a wide array of walks of life, and they didn't have skills in publishing. They didn't know the field. They didn't know the industry. Going straight into publishing, like if we went straight into publishing, we would be like, what's going on here? We don't have the contacts. We don't know how it works. We're having to learn everything, right?
Yep.
You don't have to make a hypothesis. You don't have to like go full Kofnes here. You can just be like, you hired a bunch of people because of their race and gender identity.
Right.
With no skills, and just assumed that they would magically, like it's called like magic institutions. You put them into a magic institution and they magically become competent. No, that's not what happened. And so there was a market feedback. They were not selling books because they didn't have the contacts. They were not they were not selling books. They were not finding authors because they didn't have the skills in publishing. Duh. You just magically thought that they could like do something because they were competent in some other domain. Well, these women were laid off, and a couple of years later, and they were like, "We don't know what happened here." But everyone in publishing probably knows what happened here. You hired people that had no domain skills for what you hired them for. Okay, so you fired them.
But to play devil's advocate and defend Kofnas's thesis, which is a thesis that various people have made to a greater or lesser extent, though he's emphasized it most strongly. He would argue that even if, he argued before Trump was elected, even if Trump is elected, the left will still overwhelmingly dominate education, particularly academia, and certain other key cultural institutions. So on a longer time scale, the problem of wokeness is unlikely to go away. And indeed, citing figures from Eric Kaufman's recent book, younger academics are even woker than the older generations who are about to retire. And as a consequence, wokeness may have even more cultural power in, say, a decade or 20 years, depending on what happens with AI, of course.
Yeah, I think the key issue is like how influential, and like academia is like a big deal in part of the pipeline of cultural projection power and cultural formation. How influential academia will be going forward in the future, like that is TBD. Partly because they are self-marginalizing. They're going. The whole move to blue sky is representative of a whole like system of habits and patterns and behaviors of self-marginalizing. Yeah. And as you guys know, right now, under the Trump administration, academia is under the gun. No money, like less money, more problems is gonna be a serious issue here, right? So, I mean, like they do love their values and their principles, but they also love their paychecks.
I would intervene and say that while that's true, and that one may feel sorry for certain people in certain disciplines, AI is a much bigger threat to their way of life than the Trump administration.
In the medium term.
Yeah.
I mean, because like in terms of AI, like I actually am like what is it's called I need to like check this out more, but so I actually got on a prototype of a paper writing AI, deep writer AI. I give you have you heard of it?
No, I haven't. But
I haven't.
It writes really good papers on like short prompts.
Yeah, I don't doubt it.
Let me be explicit for the listener who haven't been in academia. Academia is like defined by like a hyper Pareto principle in terms of impact, long-term impact. Like 1% of the papers are going to be remembered, 2 or 3 years later. Right. Most papers are produced for other academics. They're barely read. A lot of them, you can tell that they're kind of phoned in. It's like the same stuff over and over again. There's a guy at, I'm not gonna say which university. No, a guy at George Mason, because he tells people like to do. I forget his name now, but he writes a paper every 2 weeks. Okay.
Yeah.
And whatever. Like he has the data, empirical data. He rearranges it. It's paper product. It's a publishable unit. It's going out there. This is not real scholarship. It's it's kind of like a cargo cult scholarship in a way. It's the papers are supposed to be like Goodhart's rule is like on crack here, where it's like the underlying principle that papers are reflecting scholarship. It's been gamified out of control, right?
Yeah.
And so what AI is going to do is 99% of those papers that no one cares about and no one reads.
Yeah.
It's going to like 100x those. Really high quality papers, that 1%, those are going to be like, right now, they're definitely not AI capable, probably for the medium term future. Like there's always tells when you read AI, you're like, people who actually read a science paper will know, oh, there's way too much AI in this, right? Like you could tell. So we're going to see kind of like a sifting of the wheat from the chaff here, and it's going to be interesting. But I've been talking. Okay, like, what do you guys think about that?
But this horrified me. So I was just began listening to Ezra Klein's most recent podcast, and he was talking about using deep research for upcoming podcasts. So he said he has a research team, and I imagine he has a very bright research team. It's Ezra Klein. He's at the New York Times. He has a lot of resources. He has a lot of prestige. And he said deep research in 3 minutes produced a research package that he said was like the average of any team he could get right now. That's in 3 minutes. And, it would take his team, who knows, multiple days, right? Okay. If this thing increases, let's just move that forward another year. You do the deep research in a year, it's probably going to be better than any research team you could feasibly get together, and it's going to do it in 1 minute. That is astonishing. And to quote, I'll quote Ezra Klein here, but this is something Noah and I have both been saying as well. We're not ready for this. I mean, I really think this is, it's radically going to change the labor force, especially the white collar labor force. And academics are walking insouciantly, almost unaware that this is going to, like, at some point, I can have Kurt Gödel and John von Neumann and William Shakespeare on my phone.
Yeah, but them complaining about the Trump administration when AI is approaching would be like, the Ukrainians complaining that an eagle is flying over when the Russian army is approaching. Like, AI is the big thing to be concerned about in respect to your livelihood.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I get what you're saying. One thing I will say about the AI, and I just talked to Charles Murray, as you guys might know, recently, and he's worried about AI, but there are all sorts of issues relating to, like, are the models going to increase linearly better? I mean, part of the issue with LLMs is, and this is one of the things that I caution people, like in 2020, all the best and brightest researchers, like, they did not think this was going to happen.
That's right.
So and these are people that, and what I want to get across here is, like, this means that they didn't really know their field in a deep way. I'm not trying to be, like, dismissive here, because some people are like, oh, like, you're retarded, you don't know computer science. But the point is, like, if you're not able to make predictions, there's some serious issues with your premises and what you understand. And so AI is really, really taken off under LLMs and, like, backpropagation, these transformers and all these things. But it could hit a saturation point. There are issues relating to just energy inputs, where maybe in theory, if we, like, harness the sun, there's all sorts of issues like that. So I would.
Are you forwarding a Gouldian punctuated equilibrium theory of AI development? Saltatory?
No. But, like, it's like, we just assume that things will change in a linear way, or exponential, whatever. And that's because it has over this interval, but AI has gone through multiple hype cycles. Right? With different technology.
I would say that it doesn't need to get substantially better to be better than most academics. It's already better than some portion.
Oh yeah, it's already better. I think the papers that I've seen are already better than, like, the bottom half. I don't know, something like that.
Agreed.
Right.
Like, it's over the interval 1 to 50%. Over the interval 1 to 50%.
Doesn't need to become like a super intelligence of the kind that Nick Bostrom has written about to be a serious threat to people's livelihood.
As you guys know, there's already a lot of plagiarism where people just cut and paste other people's papers.
Yes.
So part of it is, like, the way intellectual production works is already fake, and AI can, like, in terms of just, like, you just publish some crap papers somewhere that no one reads. You're like, oh, this is what I did. Whatever. No one cares. It has no impact. It's
right.
It's like, if we could know, well, I mean, to some extent we do know, but really, like, like 10% of scientists do 90% of the scientific work, right?
Sure.
Like that's going to be, it's like, so if you could get rid of, say, 80%, you would save all those salaries. So a lot of these people have sinecures, right?
That's true. And if what we were talking about is eradicating this 80 to 90% of, tedious garbage articles, and then preserving the human input in the 10%, or even, as you like, the brilliant 1%, the scintillating 1%, or the revolutionary 1%, I would be fine with that. I am afraid that that's not what's going to happen. I'm afraid that that scintillating 1% is going to be AI as well pretty soon. Now, you're right. I mean, there was kind of this big bang with LLMs, and we don't know that it will improve linearly. But as Noah said, it's already very good. I used deep research today after I listened to Klein because I just wanted to, I was like, how good is deep research? So I asked it a question. I asked it about immigration and wages and per capita GDP. And it gave me a pretty impressive report, complete with a number of references that I then used. And it was incredibly helpful. And it was definitely, if I had to put that report together myself, it would have taken me like 3 days. And I consider myself quite adept at doing research. Like, I'm pretty good at finding the papers. I know how to find them, to look at a review and then follow the thread, as it were. So I'm very impressed by it and also terrified by it.
I mean, yeah, the notion that it's going to get this good and no better seems incredibly implausible. Well, whether it will reach super intelligence ever, I don't know. How long it will take to get better, I also don't know. But that it will get somewhat better seems extremely likely, and therefore a lot of people are going to be replaced.
What I would say is like low level, routinized white collar work. I think all of us probably would be able to would be willing to put a substantial financial bet that it's going to be radically transformed within the next 5 years.
Yeah.
Right. Paralegals, translators are already like radically impacted, but there are people.
Ghostwriters. Like, I just think of like ghostwriting. Like, I imagine you can just talk to an advanced chatbot and say, let me tell you my life story, and turn it into something that's coherent and readable.
Yeah.
There's this article in The Spectator, which I mentioned in my recent AI piece, Yes, You're Going to Be Replaced, in which the author, who is a best-selling author, described that how he pasted his draft novel into an advanced AI. The draft novel was not in the AI's training data, and within seconds, it read the entire novel and gave him expert-level feedback, which he considered to be comparable to the feedback he'd received from his expert human publisher. If an AI can read a book in seconds, that's extremely impressive, and you're probably not going to have a job in 10 years' time.
Yeah, I mean, what I do is I always like ask the AIs right now to write an essay in my voice, and right now I would say it's like a C+. Okay. So it's definitely like serviceable, but it's like okay, like it's kind of generic, you know?
Yeah.
There's a genericness to it where it's like okay, so it can take what I've written and kind of create something that is a reasonable facsimile. But there's nothing original. The original creativity is like pretty hard for it. So if you can like figure that out, I think that's an issue. I think it's good that we're talking about this. Everyone's talking about AI, in our sphere. I think having some creative value add is the key here. If you're a paralegal, you got a problem. If you're a criminal defense attorney or a prosecutor, you might actually just be able to have a team of AIs now. Humans are still going to be relevant. You just have to be one of those humans that somehow is relevant. Like always, like we got to hustle and scramble. This is creative destruction, Schumpeter. And I'd say I'm moderately optimistic, actually, even though there's going to be like a lot of chaos because, we're going to be able to get more productive, like with all the saved time.
I would describe myself as pessimistic. I think Bo would describe himself the same way.
Yeah. You've been turned into a British person, Bo. No. No, there's already
some preliminary evidence that AI can be very creative. Like, they administered a measure of creativity that was used in the psychology literature to an AI, and it scored at the 98th percentile. There was another study where they asked AI to come up with ideas for a new product that could be marketed for $50 or less to college students, and then compared the answers of AI to the answers of MBA students and asked human judges to evaluate them. And all 35 of the top 40 best business ideas were ones that AI had generated.
Okay.
Yeah, and to your point that it writes a C plus, Razib Khan, is that what you said? C plus, I think. I don't want to.
Yeah, I'd give it a C plus.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. So what disturbs me is the thought that it will get to an A minus or an A,
Sure.
and I will be able to say, write an essay in my style, and I write with some panache. Some people may say it's purple, whatever, but some self-conscious literary style. Part of it now is almost purposeful because I want to distinguish it from AI prose, which, as you said, tends to be, it's like rather generic. It's not bad. It's just kind of boring. It's, it's vanilla pudding, as it were. But if it gets to the point where it's producing Charles Dickens level prose, okay, so you see what happens in chess, for example. Now the computers can just annihilate any chess player, right? And it's led to myriad cheating scandals because you play online. It's like you don't know if you're playing you don't know if you're playing a 3800 FIDE supercomputer or a 2600 opponent. Now, okay, with chess you can put in all of these protections, and you still have over the board chess where you can monitor, and it's much more difficult to cheat. With prose writing, with writing scientific blogs or articles, how can we tell who's the cheater? I mean, you have these AI detectors, but they're very easy to get around. It's not difficult. So
you got to bring blue book tests and oral culture, I guess, to some extent.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been complaining about this recently. Like, people are using AI in my replies on Twitter. And I'm just like, wait, and like a couple of times I've argued with the person using AI, but then I'm just like, wait a second, and I get pissed because I'm just like, this is not fair. I'm not going to argue with somebody using AI because it's like you're not even doing your own arguing, and it's like removing the satisfaction of being like, see there, you fucking retard. It's like, it's just the whole thing feels farcical.
One positive effect that AI may have is it's destroying social media, which I use a lot because I have to for work, but I don't like and don't approve of. And if social media just becomes a vast sea of AI bots interacting with one another, it will no longer be particularly informative or entertaining for humans.
The slop the slop aspect is AI slop everywhere is causing a huge problem. Like, I'm seeing on YouTube too, people are using Notebook LM to create like podcasts, and they're so generic and fake. In terms of
I saw a funny YouTube video made by a guy who says he lost his job to AI. He was writing fairly generic articles for some company, and the company realized that they could just paste their information or their notes into an AI and generate these articles without his input. And he, at the end of the video, he says, although I lost that job to AI, I still have income, and now I'm starting this YouTube channel, which I think AI won't be able to replace. And then someone in the comments pointed out that under the video there was a YouTube feature which says, "Get an AI summary of this video."
Yeah. Well, I mean, let's end talking about like a little bit about like politics. Go back. Give us I haven't read your against the MAGA whatever, or listened to that podcast yet. Give us a summary of like that podcast and what your problem is with the MAGA and the MAGA.
Well, okay, so I've never been a fan of Donald Trump's. Just to be clear, so I won't go too much into my political biography, but in 2015-16, I thought like he had a real appeal that people were underestimating. And I kind of understood the appeal, but I was certainly opposed to him at that time. I think I liked Marco Rubio much better at that time, which I revised my opinion in light of current events. But my problem is I'm an actual like conservative, like a Russell Kirk, Edmund Burke, Roger Scruton conservative who believes in prudence, civility, slow change. Even when I do think we took 3 steps in the wrong direction and I want to get back from where we came, I think we need to do so judiciously. I'm not a let's break stuff and see what happens type person with the government. That works in the market. And that's one thing that's really cool about markets is you can go in there and fuck shit up. And there are positive externalities because that which works survives and all of the other stuff is destroyed, and that's fine. So I don't like the trollish aspect of MAGA, the constant desire for liberal tears, and it seems to be fueled by what Nietzsche called resentment, this desire just to punish liberal enemies and to drink their tears and to revel in their rage. I find that all quite counterproductive to conservative goals. Also, for example, I'm sympathetic to the goals of smaller government, but the way to do that is to be very judicious and have a plan, not just to cut stuff and piss people off. I mean, that's actually how you create a backlash, which is something that you always have to worry about in politics. Also, just the worship, the cultish worship and genuflection before Donald Trump, who is just clearly a boorish ignoramus, is unbecoming of conservatism, I would say. This is a party that warned for so long that character is destiny, and that if you elevate bad characters to positions of power, you will pay the price for it. And they argued, Democrats supported, Bill Clinton and all of these amoral politicians, and it sort of made our culture more coarse. And now they're supporting somebody who, in one press conference, says, I don't know, about 5 to 10 things that would just like shock you to the point that your hair would be standing up if it were any other human being. Right? I mean, like when you watch the Zelensky press conference, just for one example, I mean, not only did they get in a shouting match with Zelensky, but also like the random shit Trump was saying was so bizarre. It was almost incomprehensible. Like he went on a spiel, for example, about how he and Putin had forged this bond because of the Russia hoax, which came from Hunter Biden's bathroom. It's just very bizarre. Anyway, it seems to be more of a victim call, an unfortunate victim call that is every bit as epistemically irrational as wokeism.
Noah, do you have anything to say?
Yeah, I don't go quite as far as Bo, although I agree with some, maybe much of what he says about MAGA. I tend to believe that wokeness was significantly and discernibly crazier than MAGA, even while acknowledging that MAGA has some crazy elements. And I think Bo and I disagree somewhat on Trump's foreign policy, which I'm slightly less critical of than he is.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. So I think like some of the stuff that Bo says is like obviously, incontrovertible in terms of, okay, like right now as we're recording, the tariff stuff is happening.
Yes.
From what I know, even his staff are just like, what are we doing here? But, the big guy on top loves the tariffs, and so it's going to happen. And it's causing a lot of chaos. We'll see. Some of the stuff like the anti-DEI push, inspired in part by Dick Hanania's work, but other people as well. That seems like that's been very effective and has, really transformed the culture. There's going to be a massive amount of deregulation. Also, when you there's going to be some changes to academic publishing, and I'm just going to say, by the time this is posted, it might already, the executive orders and whatever might be out there. But I've heard there's going to be some stuff that's going to be happening, and people like Mike Eisen are going to be very happy. Let's just say those of you who know what exactly what I'm trying to say here. But not everything is going to be crazy stuff and foreign policy and tariffs and all. But in terms of like the online social aspect, I think you are correct. I think, Bo, in terms of with wokeness, one of the weird issues, and it was like anti-weird, in fact, white or Western, educated, industrialized, rich, developed, is who said what mattered a lot, and not what they said. And I think that really frustrated both of you, to some extent me, but I'm just like, knowing your personality, it was like, as a white male, like you have to like, listen and all this stuff. And you're just like, who the fuck cares that I'm a white male? I have like better ideas than you, which did not go well, which might go down well, you know. Well, the wokeness is actually kind of similar, or like MAGAs are kind of like that. Like recently, there was a thing, Jeremy Kaufman, kind of like a libertarian edgelord, New Hampshire Free State. I have a good relationship with him. He's actually a nice guy, but he was saying, just kind of as a thought experiment, like Vivek, the things he said triggered a lot of people, and he was like, well, yeah, but if it was like Trump who said it, they would be okay with it because an Indian American is not allowed to say certain things, whether you agree or not, is not allowed to say certain things because of their positionality. Well, that's a very non-weird viewpoint, actually. That's a very woke viewpoint in a way. I don't like to use the term woke right, honestly, because I don't know what that means. Like there's too many terms, but I think you're observing a real tendency of identitarianism among MAGA that is very reminiscent of the woke period. On the other hand, MAGA doesn't have the same control of the institutions. These sorts of denunciations will not lead to cancellation that's like irrevocable. Vivek Ramaswamy right now is the odds-on favorite to win the governorship of Ohio. So what happens online has not totally transferred to IRL. Indian workers in tech still have their jobs. So a little bit. A lot of it is performative. I mean, I agree that it's annoying, but I think that we're a couple of months. We're less than 2 months into Donald Trump's administration. I think what you are alluding to began before he was elected with the Elonification of Twitter, but really accelerated after he got elected as president-elect and after the executive orders really just like turbocharged to the next level. And that is a fact. And it's frustrating for people like you, Bo, who are, critical rationalists and, want to be calm and but like most people, like they're driven by their passions. They're not very smart. I've already complained extensively about the stupidity. So, you got to take the good with the bad and just understand that, you got to pick up the pieces from, what's broken during this period. A lot of institutions are going to be broken and they're going to try to rebuild it. Right. So I think that that's the optimistic take that you have to do.
I am certainly open to many of those arguments. In terms of the, and it's not in real life. That's fair, perfectly fair. But that's what people said in like 2014 about academia. It's not real life. It's just academia. And then that actually spread out into the culture. So I would just worry that some of that will spread out into the culture, especially when the most powerful person in that coalition is himself a relentless troll. That is what he's good at. And I would say he's one of the best trolls in the history of man. I mean, he was like born for social media and for social media discourse.
Yeah. That's fair. I mean, he is 78 years old though, and believe it or not, he will not live forever, and he is unlikely to become president again. So, it could be that he is a very abnormal. I mean, part of the issue is like, if Trump was a judicious person, like you are hoping he would be, or like hope someone like Trump, all of the crazy stuff that we like the anti-DEI stuff, that would not have happened. Because he would have listened to everyone like, look, like you're going to break things, it's going to cause problems. And so it's like, I think with Trump, a lot of the pro-Trump people, these are not like the standard MAGA base who are just like, he one of us or whatever, It's like they have like a different like emotional connection. They have a connection with Trump that a lot of Black Americans and white liberals had with Barack Obama.
Yeah.
And that is like a little difficult for people like us to get because, we're not regular people who have to like, kind of anchor to a messianic, almost like figure that'll take care of us. We want to know what they're going to do, what they think.
That's fair. And the point that his demons are in some way also his angels is fair. But I would point out that I think DeSantis would have been as effective on anti-DEI legislation, and he was certainly much more competent and much less boorish. And we could have had DeSantis. I mean, he was once a viable candidate. So I would argue that it would be vastly preferable to live in a world with DeSantis where he's not whimsically throwing down 25% tariffs on Canada and Mexico, but he is attacking excessive wokeness.
Yeah, the tariffs on Canada seem to have had the very interesting and unexpected effect of dramatically boosting the poll ratings of the Liberal Party at the expense of the Conservative Party. So it's now possible that despite being well ahead in the polls for months, the Conservative Party will lose or at least not overwhelmingly win the upcoming election in Canada.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair. I mean, so one thing that my MAGA friends, I do tell them, I'm like, thermostatic reaction is a fact of life. Like, the next couple of months, you're going to start to probably see a little bit of a turn. People are going to be exhausted. The part of the problem with the first Trump administration was just a constant drama, and that's, I think, why Biden was elected, and why a lot of like educated white people decide to just moderately conservative, centrist educated white people flipped to Biden in 2020 because like they were tired of the drama. It was like a reality TV show. They didn't want to watch it anymore. Trump's got to watch that. We'll see. The first part of the administration is always the most active, so this will abate. So let's pivot. We've been going an hour and a half. We got to close out at some point, but like I want to pivot to England. Sadder topic, I guess, in a way. The United Kingdom. This great fallen empire. The rump of greatness that is. I think from an American perspective, Americans that pay attention to England, which is like a minority of Americans because we don't know that the rest of the world exists, but some of us do. It's all very perplexing. What's happening? Just looking at the aggregate numbers. I've talked to Louise Perry about this. Your demographics, your lack of social cohesion. I will say I've been to England once, and it was fine. It definitely felt like home compared to the rest of Europe. But when I was in London, I definitely got the vibe that you people were way more gung-ho on multiculturalism than America. It's like you people in a way were, because I mean, the British in some ways are less woke than Americans because you have to copy us because you're not original about that sort of stuff. But in another way, you were more woke in terms of like the multiculturalism, the openness and encouraging ethnic segregation, even though, say, for example, Afro-British have much higher exogamy rates than Black Americans just because of the numbers issue. So it's not always like borne out by the data. But I definitely got the vibe in the culture like that you guys were down with like having like different cultures and societies within your nation, which you already do have with the Welsh and the Scottish and the Northern Irish, arguably. But you were replicating that with your immigrants from Asia, Africa, etc.
That's exactly right. And I think it was Ed West, the conservative writer, who noticed that the British elites were very sad when they lost their empire, so they decided to import one instead and have all these different groups in their cities rather than overseas in other countries. And rather than trying to make them British, they encouraged them or permitted them to retain their home culture.
And that home culture is, look, I mean, like if you had a bunch of Pakistanis like living in, say, Serbia, there are some connection points between, shall we say, Balkan culture and Pakistani culture. Even though they're quite different, there's some connection points. Arguably, the English culture, at least like the middle class to upper class English culture, is the biggest difference from like some Asiatic clan culture in the whole world, right? So you had like this like vast chasm, and now you have people in the British, I think it was in Parliament or it was in some council, Pakistani, like, councilman is like, well, we should not ban cousin marriage because it supports family values, which is like in America, people would just like laugh because they're like, okay, like you just are being like inbreeding is good, y'all. I don't know. It's like, literally, I think people would laugh in America. We're not that tolerant, but it's like he's saying this, and like the British people are accepting this as like a normal thing to say. Like, what's going on here?
Yeah, no, it's pretty extraordinary, and the negative health effects of the cousin marriage that exists among British Pakistanis, to a lesser extent Bangladeshis, is very well documented. There was even a major BBC article about it the other day, which you may have seen, Razib.
Yeah, so it's like impacting the NHS, the National Health Service. So you guys have this big welfare state. You're giving also like, you guys have like quasi-universal basic income from what I can tell. Like in terms of like the Labour government gives a lot of money to a lot of people for a lot of reasons. And, but like your economy hasn't really grown much since 2008. after the recession kind of like took a hit on the financial services.
According to the government's official series on real GDP per capita, Britain is barely ahead of where it was in 2008.
Yeah, so I mean, you have some insurgent parties, but it's not like the continent is first past the post. So Labour is in power now with Keir Starmer. Seems like it's very unpopular, but you have like these two parties, like, America sometimes.
I've written a bit about this. The Conservatives, before they lost the last election, were extremely unpopular, and now Labour in power is extremely unpopular. I think it's partly because neither Sir Keir Starmer or the Conservative leaders who preceded him are particularly talented or competent politicians, but it's also partly because there are some fundamental problems in the British economy that politicians can't easily solve from any party. One of them is a problem that affects many advanced countries, namely population aging, and the fact that more and more money is going towards pensions and healthcare. Another problem that affects much of Europe, but less so the US, is the energy crisis that's blown up since the start of the Ukraine war. Before the start of the war, energy was already more expensive in Europe due to various environmental regulations and just the fact that Europe doesn't have a lot of indigenous energy outside of Norway. But it's really, energy has become much more expensive since 2022. And thirdly, there's a really big problem in Britain, which is that we've had huge rates of immigration, particularly since the end of COVID. But we haven't been building anywhere near the amount of homes that are required, particularly in the south of the country and around London, where much of the economic growth is occurring, but would occur were the economic policies more far-sighted. And the issue there is primarily that the areas that people are moving to are surrounded by these green belts, which are areas that you're not allowed to build certain types of structures on, basically in which development is heavily restricted. And there's a good case for them because urban sprawl is often ugly, but what effect they have is that house prices just keep on rising, and when people's incomes aren't going up, that's very tough.
Yeah. One thing I'm going to say here is Britain has like a bunch of problems. I talked about this with Louise Perry. Two of them here is like the housing and the immigration, right? These are both. Housing is definitely soluble. We know how to solve it. It's a solved issue in a lot of the world. I've been noticing recently, like, housing drives people insane in terms of like the conversation with specious objections. So for example, I live in Austin, Texas. Have you ever been to Austin, Bo? I know you're not a big traveler.
No, I have not.
All right. So Austin, Texas is a Texas city. It's a liberal city, but it's a Texas city, so it allows building. The skyline is totally transformed, and so we have these luxury condominium complexes. So what happens is people pay $5,000, $10,000, depending on what they want to pay a month to live in these luxury complexes. And then like, people are like, oh, well, yeah, you're only building housing for rich people. Okay, but like the issue is rich people live in the luxury condominium complexes, and then they don't buy a 3-bedroom house.
Right.
And then that 3-bedroom house is available for someone. I don't understand why, because like they're like, oh, you're only building for rich people, so there's no houses for. It's like those houses don't magically disappear. Like, this is like a solved problem. So our rents have been going down for 2 years.
There's a unique problem in London, which Louise Perry may have mentioned to you, which is that there's a huge amount of social housing right in the center of London. Social housing is housing owned by the state, and the rents are obviously heavily subsidized. And much of this social housing is occupied by relatively recent immigrants, many of whom are British citizens, but nonetheless are relatively recent arrivals. And regardless of who's occupying the social housing, it's a fact that when this housing isn't available to the private market, people who would have otherwise been able to live there have to live further out. It's basically like the state is saying, you arbitrarily get a Ferrari, you get to live in central London, one of the most expensive places in the world. You don't.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean there is no, I mean there's some of this in the U.S. a little bit with like housing although a lot of the public housing were blown up. But with the immigration, um, I think the main question that I have some people have brought up is, you have a lot of immigrants working in say the NHS and stuff like that. In addition to the ones that are like massive net deficits, because I mean it seems like the British immigration system, it's not as bad as some continental systems which like are favoring refugees, but it was created piecemeal like much of your legal and institutional system, and it's not rationalized say like the Australian system, which like you can game. Canada has shown how you can game a point system, but that gaming is very easy to ungame because you see what's happening, right? Whereas for the British system, the problem with your immigration system, what I can see is like it's piecemeal, and there's all these different types of immigrants coming in, and some of them, I mean, you do get some good ones, not as good as America for various reasons. No offense, but then like in terms of like high human capital, like like educated, whatever. But then you get a lot of people, from what I can tell, that I mean they don't add much. But I don't know.
Yeah, I think a lot of the immigrants that have arrived in just the last few years in the UK are much less selected positively in terms of education and other relevant traits than were the immigrants that arrived in the preceding era. This is not to say that Britain is getting immigrants of the level of selection that America gets from Asia, but as you said a few minutes ago, the immigrants to the UK are less negatively selected than the ones to many European countries. For example, in the PISA data, immigrant children perform about the same on average as native-born children, whereas in many European countries they perform dramatically worse.
Yeah, and so everyone knows.
Yes, people have been gaming the system in recent years by bringing in their dependents, and a huge proportion of the people who've come in are the dependents of people who have come to work in the NHS, and are therefore much less selected in terms of qualifications.
And so I mean, the British know that they have a problem. I think everyone agrees that they have a problem, but it seems like none of your major parties have a solution. Yeah,
I guess the Reform Party claims that they want to clamp down on immigration, on these dependents that are coming in. Whether they'll ever get into power remains to be seen. They are sort of joint first in the polls at the moment, but of course, because of our system, as you mentioned, a first past the post system, that doesn't translate easily into an electoral outcome favoring them.
Yeah,
and then they're much less radical in terms of their rhetoric, for example, than some of the continental right-wing parties. I mean, much less radical than. I say radical just to use the nomenclature of the press.
Yeah,
I don't consider immigration restrictionism radical, but they're less radical in that respect than say the AFD.
Yeah. I mean, Bo, do you have any thoughts on what's going on in Britain?
I do not have any sagacious thoughts about Britain, and I think Noah summarized it quite eloquently.
Yeah. I mean,
I do pay attention, but I don't have any like particular expertise.
So I guess like the last question I gotta, I'm just gonna ask you, Noah, just what's going on with this. I mean, I kind of know, but what is this whole thing about, Suella Braverman and like these non-white people being or not being English? Can you just like tell Americans what's going on here?
Yeah, so there's a very popular podcast called Trigonometry, hosted by Konstantin Kisin and Francis Foster. And Konstantin has a very big Twitter account these days, and he's a very noted public commentator. And he was interviewing Fraser Nelson, who's the former editor of The Spectator, which is the most important conservative magazine in the UK. But Fraser Nelson is not particularly conservative, it turns out. He's more kind of classical liberal, I guess. Fraser Nelson was asked, is Rishi Sunak English? Rishi Sunak being the ethnically Indian but British former prime minister. And Fraser Nelson maintained that he is English. And Konstantin Kisin, who's again British but of Russian Jewish origin, I believe, said no, he's he's a brown Hindu, so he can't be English. And this was, again, coming from someone who does not consider himself to be ethnically English. So Constantine, according to my understanding, identifies ethnically as, I don't know, Jewish or Russian,
Eastern
Jewish,
Ashkenazi, yeah.
Eastern European. I'm not exactly sure, but he recognizes that his nationality is English. And then this sparked a huge furore on social media because people have very strong opinions about what English means and doesn't mean. And of course, many people accused Constantine of being racist, even though he was applying the same standard to himself that he was applying to Rishi Sunak. And then Suella Braverman, who's former conservative minister, who's herself, I believe, of South Asian heritage. I'm not exactly sure which country she traces her ancestry to. She basically agreed with Constantine. That Rishi Sunak his nationality is British, but he's not ethnically English, and that's okay.
Yeah, so one thing I'll say about this is it's like you guys speak English, like we obviously share a lot of the culture with you guys, but in some ways you guys are a little bit more continental. I think also like mostly I think mostly British people are more like Americans and they're like continental Europeans because we are sibling cultures, but in some ways there's a little bit more continental sometimes. And I think this is one of the things what Americans forget is there are already multiple indigenous nations in the United Kingdom. English people are British people, but not all British people are English people. So there are Scottish people, Irish people, and Welsh people who are indigenous. I mean, I guess you could say Cornish, but like they don't speak their language anymore. They are indigenous to the UK. Among the English people, the dialect differences, as you guys know, are huge, almost to the point where I've seen American newscasters when they go to England, sometimes like subtitles are turned on for some of the people that they're interviewing. Not like people like Noah, but you know what I'm saying.
That's some very interesting accents in England still. Happily.
Yeah, so there's a lot of like variation, a lot of cultural depth here. And so there was a whole thing that I remember. I have friends who I have a friend who's like Indian, ethnically Indian, from Bombay, and he was boarding school educated in Britain. He has the Queen's English accent. And he ended up moving to America. He's an American citizen now, but he thought about staying in Britain for a little while. And he told me that like he could see himself, he would have said, yeah, I'm British, but he would not say he's English. And so this is not even a racist point. It's just like a semantic informative point where the English are one of the sub-nations of the United Kingdom. And when you have someone from, I don't know, Lithuania or India or, wherever, or Africa come to the UK, what they're assimilating into is the national identity that's British, which is different than English. Like to some extent, this is just a semantic thing for someone I think like like more from like a middle class cosmopolitan background, right? But if you're from Essex, that's a very, very specific, like rural Essex, I'm just saying, is a very, very specific type of English person. And like these immigrants who are going to Birmingham or like, East London or where, they're not assimilating to that at all. And so I think that people are trying to say, the non-racist people, there are racist people, but the non-racist people are trying to say, look, English means a specific things, a specific cluster of things that are distinct from British culture, that are local to the English ethnicity, which evolved out of the synthesis of the Normans and the Anglo-Saxons and all that stuff. That's all that some people are saying. Now, Americans, they get a little confused when they hear that because we think you're just like us, and you're not just like us. Like, you have, like, pubs that date to the 13th century. That's just, like, super weird. Like, in the U.S., it's like a century-old pub is amazing, or a century-old bar. It's like, whoa, like, historic. Like, downtown here in Austin, there's the Driscoll, and I think it dates to, like, the 1890s, and it's, like, incredibly old.
Yeah, there's a nice story that I once told in the form of a tweet that went viral about Oxford. So an American tourist was in one of the old colleges in Oxford, Oriel College, I believe. And he asked the porter of the college, person at the front gate, "Oh, is this college pre or post-war?" And the man replied, "My dear fellow, this college is pre-America."
Yeah, exactly. So, we don't understand the context. I will say sometimes, like, some Americans are trying to kind of like interpolate or like integrate like the more European racial ethnic understanding. And like, again, like this is a debate people are having. So, I see people, again, this is like the retardation of modern Twitter. It's like an immigrant, like a non-American immigrant like Vivek Ramaswamy cannot like talk about white Americans like that. These are things you see on Twitter. one, he was born in the U.S. Second, he's an American citizen. He ran for president. So, maybe in Europe, it kind of makes sense to say something like that someone is an immigrant if they were still born here. In America, it just doesn't make sense. That's not been part of our culture for a long time. And so, like, we're having these sorts of, like culture wars trying to redefine the Overton window. And, I know that a lot of people are like pretty stressed, like, oh, like, is this becoming a white nationalist nation? No, it's just Twitter. I mean, honestly, I understand that sometimes Twitter can become real life, but the reality is you're not going to repatriate half of America's population, including the Black Americans who were brought here before the revolution because it's a white nationalist country. That's just like a ridiculous LARP online. And, my attitude is like, you probably shouldn't engage it because it's not realistic. Most of these guys that are saying this have Asian wives anyway,
Yeah.
So it's like,
most of the people talking about the fertility crisis don't have kids.
That's fair.
That a shot across the bow at me.
No, you're far from the only one.
I have 3. Yeah, at natal. So I'm going to be at natal, and that was like part of the hit piece that we didn't talk about in detail. But
true, yeah.
I will be at natal, and like natal is split between. It's like natal is like a Pareto principle where it's like there's a minority of trads that have like 80% of the children, and then like 80% of the people have very few. Some of them have none, and probably will have none. But, people come to like the fertility crisis for different reasons. Some people it's just like, be fruitful and multiply. Whereas other people, they're worried about like cultural dynamism. And, I was interviewed for a New Yorker piece on natalism, which was like, not a hit piece or anything. They didn't use any of my quotes that I can see. But, my point was like, there's a lot of people who like read science fiction. And yeah, they're not like trad cats, but they're worried about an aging population, because what happens with an aging population is kind of cultural senescence,
Yes.
in terms of the dynamism. Meanwhile, we're having AI. Like this might be the worst time to have a fertility crisis, because like it could be the AIs like just make a deal, like, look, we'll take care of you in the nursing home really well, and you just kind of like go into the distance as like humanity kind of like expires off itself by day.
I'm pretty sure. Didn't you share with me that video? Didn't it have an AI robot with an elderly person, Noah?
Yeah. There's a bunch of those. There's a bunch of those.
Yeah. That's.
I mean, the issue is like the boomers might go for it because the boomers don't care about any future generation. So, I mean, that's where we are. So we've been talking for a couple of hours. It's been great catching up with you. Obviously, we can find you guys on social media, at least for now. Aporia, elsewhere. I think like people have a better sense of, a better sense of you, better sense of where your guys are coming from. It's what I would say about Aporia is like I understand like some of the listeners are going to be like, oh, like like it's like problematic and all that stuff, but like there's a lot of things out there, a lot of content. You guys. I find you guys interesting, and that's more than a lot of the slop you see out there. I mean, that's actually like, unfortunately, something that is harder to be interesting, to surprise, is harder than you would think. If you want to read the same old, yeah, like obviously Aporia is not going to be for you, but if you want to read something new and surprising, something that challenges you, I do think you guys are trying hard to do that. So more power to you and respect.
Yeah,
because
quickly interject and just say to any of your listeners who think, oh, that repugnant Aporia website, send us your disagreements and we're happy to publish them. We're always looking for dissenting articles, and we really want to have and promote debate.
Yeah, like you definitely have like a debate me bro attitude.
Yeah, we've recently published a article by Steven Pinker, which was responding to a piece that we wrote criticizing some things that he'd said in a podcast, and it generated some interesting discussion.
Nice. All right. I guess I'm going to close it out. I think a couple hour podcast is not that big of a deal for we got 2 guests, so we had like twice as much content out there. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I will see you guys next week.
This podcast for kids.